organizations are open, honest, and fair about diversity, actually, it can be a plus for their organization.
So you are described as an expert at overcoming adversity and reaching peak performance. What advice could you give to others who are looking to do the same?
Good question. So the advice I would give to people when it comes to, overcoming adversity, because it's kind of two things. So, for me is it's the obvious: never ever give up. I remember something when I was at university. My maths teacher always used to say to me, and it was something I say it to my wife. So when you look at mathematics, so I'm good with numbers and I'm terrible with letters and English. My wife is brilliant with English, writing, spelling and all that, but she's terrible with numbers. And I always try and help her, as she does with me, with numbers. So she'll say to me, oh, I don't know, what's 4 sevens? Oh, it's 28. How do you know that so quick? How do you know? And I said, well, I just know it. And so I will try and break it down for her in a way to kind of make it a bit easier. And I use a phrase that my maths teacher always used to use. And he says, in life, you've got to be as devious as a sewer's rat. You've got to work ways around things to get where you want and what you want. And that's what I say about, overcoming adversity. You've got to be as devious as a sewer rat. And it doesn't mean doing things, illegally wrong, whatever. It means finding a way by hook or by crook to get what you want. So if we use that silly question I said about my wife, what's 4 sevens? If I said that, and it's not this simple, but I'm using a simple mathematics sort of equation to illustrate a situation. If I said to her, what's 4 sevens? She'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 28. And she'd actually count 4 lots of sevens. Now, to me, I would say, why don't you know? And if I said to her, what's 7 and 7? She'd go 14. So I go, so 2 sevens are 14. 14 and 14 is 28. So there is your answer. So you can break it down and get to it in a slightly different way. Just using that as an example. Of course, my wife knows what 4 sevens are before anybody says anything. But the whole point is there are always different routes and different ways to get from A to B. Your sat nav is a great example. If you put a destination in your sat nav, you're heading off from A to B, and all of a sudden it tells you that there's a traffic jam. It reroutes you around it. And if there's something else, it will reroute you around that. It might not get you there exactly when you plan to, but it will get you there. And to me, that's how I treat all my aims and my goals and my dreams. Is I don't give up on them, and I will, if I have to change routes and adapt, I will do that as long as it keeps me on my course to get me, to that goal. And I never give up until it's physically been proven that I can't do it. That's when I will say, okay, we now know that that is impossible, but I will not give up until there is sufficient evidence that this is now impossible to actually achieve. Other than that, I'm not going to, I'm not going to stop. So that's how I look at it. It is being devious as a sewer's rat, and almost acting like a sat nav, if you want to look at it that way. And if something's thrown at you, work your way around it. I used to describe situations, challenges as like a wall. So you're heading down a route and all of a sudden there's a wall. Just jump over it. And if it's a bit higher, climb over it. If it's way too high, walk around it. If it's way too wide, fly over it. The biggest wall we've got in this world is the Great Wall of China. You can spot that wall from the moon, but we can still get from one side of it to the other by getting on an airplane, flying from one part of the world to the other. You can still cross it. So to me, there is no wall that is too big in this world that we can't get to the other side from. Donald Trump tried it, but I don't think he's quite achieved it. We can get across from one side, from one wall to, to another. It's just how you go about doing it. So for me, I will never give up, and the perseverance for me is there because I will always find a way to get around it. Peak performance is all about performing when it really matters, certainly in sport. And the two ingredients you need to be at your peak is you need to be physically in shape, obviously. You need to physically be at your best, but you also need to be at your best mentally, because you will not perform one without the other. You could be mentally in shape, and when I say mentally in shape, you know, the confidence, the focus, knowing what your game plan is, how you're going to execute your race, or what, you know, whatever it is. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about mental, being mentally in shape. And obviously you need to be physically in shape, so you can't do one without the other. So you need to work on both of those at the same times. Interestingly enough, an hour before an Olympic final doesn't come down to your physical ability, because actually you're a talented person, but to make an Olympic final, so are all the other 7 people. So it isn't going to come down just to your talent alone. An hour before a race, you can't say, do you know what, I'm going to nip off to the gym and do an extra training session, because it's going to make no difference to you performing any better. If anything, you'll perform worse because you're going to be fatigued and tired. So physically, an hour before a race, there's nothing you can do. But mentally, there's a hell of a lot that can happen and can go on what you can do. So the mental part is as important as the physical part, but you need to work on those mental side of it during, you know, the years and the months leading up to it. And again, with all that self-belief, could be things like visualization. I used to do a lot of visualizing myself running that Olympic final from lane 1, from lane 4, from lane 2, from lane 6, from lane 7, from lane 3, different, in beautiful weather, in the wind, in the howling rain, in thunder and lightning, with different athletes, with them going off super quick and me going off slow, me going off quick, them going off slow, all different versions of that. And I would do this over and over and over. And I would visualize the Olympic final 2 years out, 3 years out. I'd always visualize these finals in my head for a number of reasons. And by the way, every time I visualized one of those races, I won. I visualized myself winning from all sorts of different scenarios. Every scenario, I won the race. And one, you start to believe that you can and will win that race. 2, when it comes to that race, you've run so many scenarios in your head that you've possibly run the scenario that is actually going to happen. And if something out of the ordinary happens, you've run that scenario so you don't panic, because you know what's going to happen. And if you just stay calm and do this and do that, run the first 100 in this, do the second 100 there, whatever your game plan is, it's going to come good. So it stops you panicking and running somebody else's race rather than running your own race. So, you know, when it comes to peak performance, I think, you know, you need a cool head. You need to be, you know, physically in shape as well as mentally in shape. And, you know, in the working environment, when I talk about physically in shape, that could be, you know, your product's where it wants to be, you know, your industry, you know, your product, you know, what needs to be done, you know, what you've got to do to get it out there. And the mental side of it is the same as it is in sport, believing that you can actually achieve it and dealing with the situation as and when it arises.
What does diversity and inclusion mean to you, and why are they important?
It's majorly important. You know, I have a presentation that I deliver on diversity and inclusion, and you know, it's amazing having competed in sport, worked in the working world, and being somebody, you know, coming from the BAME community. You know, this is something that I have my own experience in, and some of the things that I've picked up. So to answer the question as a whole, what it means to me is if organizations are open, honest, and fair about diversity, actually it can be a plus for their organization. It can actually be an asset to their organization. Now, that's quite a big, bold, sweeping statement to make. But if we just break it down a little bit, first of all, when people talk about diversity, they think of the obvious things. They think of somebody's, you know, ethnicity, where they were born, what sex they are, male or female, if they've got any disabilities, you know, they think of the obvious things. Now, actually, there are 4 types of diversity. That only is one type of diversity. That's what we refer to as internal diversity. So internal diversity are basically the things that we are born into, that we cannot change. They are us. And that's what everybody looks at. But there's 3 other types of diversities. There's external diversity, which are things that actually we do change. The way we dress, our beliefs, you know, these sort of things are things that over time can change. Heck, what football team you support, these are things that we choose to do. So that's what's known as external diversity. We then move on to organizational diversity, which really looks at where you are and where you sit or stand within your organization. Your pay level, your position. Are you, I don't know, a member of some kind of organization within your your workplace? These are the things. I mentioned pay grade. These are the things that come under organizational diversity, and then we have a fourth diversity, which is actually called world diversity. So these are the things, again, that you have some control over change. So I don't know, your intelligence. We all choose to a degree how intelligent we are or not, and we choose how much we want to learn and be educated. So intelligence comes into it. Our political beliefs, is something, again, that we have a choice of. Our morals, how we are prepared to behave within the workplace. All these things need to be taken into consideration when we talk about diversity and inclusion. So it's not just the obvious, but the advantages of seeing beyond all of those gives companies and organizations a much bigger pool of experience to call upon, because people come from all different walks of life, with different morals, with different beliefs, with different thoughts, and actually to have all that on the table when making decisions and coming up with ideas and coming up with plans and processes and procedures to take your company from where it is to where you want to be, has got to be a lot better than having a table of people who come from exactly the same mold. I'm going to tell another story about my dad, and you'll like this one because it involves food, and we all like a bit of food. My dad once told me to treat everybody like a sausage. He says, when you're older, just treat everybody like a sausage, and you know what, son, you won't go far wrong. And you might think, what the hell is he talking about? And I don't mean pick a fork up and jab it in them to make sure they're all cooked. So to explain it, my dad was in the meat trade for many, many years. And he sold meat processing equipment. And like every industry, there's exhibitions for every industry you could think of. And in the meat trade, there's no different. And there was one in this country, in the UK, in Birmingham, massive exhibition called Meatex. Original name, Meat Exhibition. It was called Meatex. And it went on for a week. And there's lots of things that happened in there, different competitions, different famous people from the meat industry and goodness knows what, giving talks and all that. It's like going to the motor show, but for meat machinery. So not as exciting. But one of the events that used to take place at Meatex was always the final of the Britain's Best Sausage competition. So they used to have regional heats around the country leading up to the event, and these butchers will make up these wonderful, weird and wonderful flavored sausages. And when it came to the final, the guys that made and girls that made the final would there'd be this massive area where they've got an area to make their sausages, a bit like watching the Great British Bake Off. You could actually sit and watch them mincing the meat and producing the skins for the sausages and all that, and putting all their spices in and cooking all these sausages. And they produce these sausages. They get X amount of time to produce these sausages. Now, this is the interesting bit. There will be a panel of judges, and they will all walk around, and they'll have their white coats on and their little white butcher's hats on and their clipboards. And every sausage already had 100 out of 100. They were all marked as perfect sausages. And then the judges will go around and knock off marks accordingly. So if the shape wasn't correct, if it wasn't soft and juicy enough, it was too salty, too spicy, not salty enough, not spicy, whatever, they would knock marks off. And it was the sausage, or the guy whose sausage had the least amount of marks knocked off, was deemed the winner. So my dad always used to say, treat people like a sausage. In other words, give them 100 out of 100, give them the benefit of the doubt that they are perfect, and let them determine how far down the sausage scale they go. And I think if everybody kind of took that attitude, diversity and inclusion wouldn't even be a topic that we would actually need to talk about, because you would be judged on your own actions and behaviors rather than how you look, how you dress, and you know, what disabilities you may or may have, what sexuality you may or may have, and all those sort of things. So, you know, for me, I would always say to people, treat people like a sausage.